Greetings ladies and gents, and welcome to this match video for Mud's mission taken from the website Royal Road. As always, I hope that you all enjoy this episode, and if you do, please consider supporting the channel. Also, all of these episodes will be available as a podcast on the various different podcast platforms. All the links will be down below. Chapter 81, Materials and Monitoring. High Priest Asitium, I hope this letter finds you well. In regards to your previous letter, I appreciate the urgency of the situation. As you have said, such a vile thing cannot be let to roam free. It is, and has ever been, our stance of the Church to eradicate such blasphemous wherever we have uncovered them. Unfortunately, the interference of the Association in this situation complicates matters greatly. Overt action is not an option at this time. While that does limit our options, it does not remove all avenues available to us. For the time being, I have made information about the location and active construct available to certain interested parties not affiliated directly with the Church. What actions they choose to take based on that information is not our responsibility. Additionally, I've dispatched an observation team to keep an eye on the actions of the construct. Due to the remoteness of your location and the lack of network access, arrival would take at least a week. In the meantime, I ask that you keep an eye on the construct using your own local resources. I understand your resources are stretched thin as it is, but do what you can. We can't let this thing slip out from our fingers before we can establish a jurisdiction to destroy it. Blessings of the Archons, Hierophant Cretem. Around sunset, Mud was approached by an association employee. Upon learning that Mud had been working without rest since the morning, he reacted with surprise. Surely, even such as you needs rest. Mud continued to repair a spell while composing its reply. I have no need for breaks. I am not limited by biology. Right, you're not alive. After a moment of thought, the employee added quickly, No offense, it's not that I don't think you're alive, or just an object, or, I'm not really sure what I mean. Mud saw no reason to reply, and a slight look of concern passed twisted on the employee's face as the golem continued working silently. While the man was an employee of a powerful association, he appeared to be a mere civilian, tasked with odd jobs to lighten the load of the more important high-tier individuals. Mud had noticed a tendency of weak sapiens to show respect and fear to the strong. There were some exceptions which puzzled the golem. Some humans that appeared very weak still garnered respect and deference from the obviously stronger individuals. The cowering human now addressing him as a prime example. Association employees, even at a civilian-level ones, seemed to occupy a social position above unaffiliated civilians. Even more extreme examples came in humans which engaged in politics. Guy Fellow, by all appearances, seemed no stronger than a civilian. If he had been leveled beyond Tier 2, it certainly did not show. While Prince Kane appeared to be a powerful fighter, the levels of respect shown towards him were well beyond what his strength warranted, at least to Mud. Much more research was needed to understand why the strongest individual did not simply use force to establish control. After all, having more control was useful for almost any other primary directive. Finishing the repairs on the current wall, Mud moved onto another section of the building. While Mud had long since run out of significant damage that needed to be repaired, it had begun repairing the weather-worn paint, splintered wood, and removing graffiti. Before Mud could begin focusing its attention towards a bit of flaking paint, he was stopped by the persistent employee. Actually, I was sent to retrieve you by the leader. He said you're a valuable tactical asset, and he would like to tell you that you and your task will be for tomorrow. You need to head back to the Delvers Association building immediately to see him. Mud took one last yearning look towards the various imperfections in the surrounding buildings that it could repair. If only it had time. With regret, it turned away from the incomplete task and made its way over to its new assignment. Shortly thereafter, Mud arrived at the Whitestone Delvers Association building and was immediately led through a series of halls into an elaborate waiting room. Exquisite paintings hung from the walls and the top floral wallpaper. Mud sat patiently on a sofa with carefully carved images of angels adorning the wooden armrests. The room was so clean that Mud didn't even feel the urge to clean it. A rarity. After a short wait, a face familiar to Mud entered the room, the elderly female clerk. Sitting opposite the golem, she smiled sweetly, folding her hands on her lap. "Hello there, Mr. Golem. Thank you for your rapid response to our summons. Leader Gould is rather busy at the moment, so I'll be giving you your assignments for tomorrow." Putting a small piece of paper from her pocket on her suit, she began to speak. Mud noted that her eyes did not look down at the note that she held, remaining instead fixed on the construct in front of her. "We believe that you will be most useful remaining outside the dungeon entrance, maintaining your Kill Pest spell, as this is your most high-impact ability, and the spell is unusable inside the dungeon. We believe that this is the most efficient use of your abilities." While the choice was tactfully sound, there was one part of the assignment that concerned the golem. "How do you know the details of my spells?" The clerk continued reciting Mud's orders, her gaze fixed on the three eyes. "Your party members will likewise remain near the surface to support your efforts. Prince Cain has graciously allowed your party to make use of one of the defensive bulwarks which have been constructed in front of the dungeon. We have assigned a rotation of mages with ideals that are not suited to combat in your bunker. They will provide you with free mana for your manipulation." "How do you know I can manipulate free mana?" "If there are any materials or supplies you require to better accomplish your task, please state them now. We will do our best to make them available to you. We ask that you arrive at the bunkers with your team by sunrise tomorrow." At that, the clerk returned the piece of paper to her pocket. Mud thought for a moment. It was clear that the human would refuse to answer questions regarding the information gathering. Mud had only recently activated the ability to manipulate mana, and yet they not only already knew about it, but had even already integrated it into their plans. While being monitored was not unexpected, Mud had been carefully observing the surroundings during the entire day. During that entire time, it had seen no indication of being watched. This was definitely a flaw in Mud's detection ability which needed to be addressed. The dangers of an unseen foe was a concept that Golem was intimately familiar with. After all, sneak attacks were a primary method of combat not long ago. There was also the possibility that she was gaining the information via some unknown method aside from direct observation. Further research was required. For now, Mud put aside the concerns and contemplated the issue of supplies. Apparently, the association was willing to provide materials to assist in holding up the dungeon entrance. Mud began listing off supplies it desired. "Provide me with as many ego weapons as you can find. 5,000 human troops is the most I could command effectively at once. Each soldier should be in a tier 9. A few contracted demons and several hundreds bombs capable of leveling an entire—" "Hold it!" The clerk held up a hand to stop the rambling demands. "I think you're misunderstanding. We don't have unlimited resources. I meant things like food, medicine, and maybe mundane armor or weapons for your group. The sort of things that you could purchase on the open market around here. We can provide for your group, free of charge, of course." Before Mud could start up again, the clerk quickly amended her explanation. And we'll be taking back anything you don't use, so don't think of asking for a bunch of stuff for you to resell." That was exactly what Mud was planning. With most of its ideas cut short, Mud lowered its requests to a more reasonable level. "Please provide the best available armor for myself and my team. Additionally, the highest quality available of the following: 1 curved sword, 1 shield, and 1 weapon suitable for Jabrax the Red. Eating items, food, and water for the human team members. Any items which you believe should be useful, which I have not mentioned." "Right, that's about what I expected. You'll receive your equipment tomorrow." Having a sudden idea, Mud added one more item. "Additionally, retrieve the weapon I'm having repaired at Ingott's blacksmith and pay the bill." Smiling slightly, the clerk nodded. "Now you're getting it. Take advantage of the Dalvers Association, but keep it within reason. Ask for too much, and you get nothing. Ask for too little, and you miss out. We're a very useful ally, wouldn't you agree, Mud?" "Yes, I agree." "And a very dangerous enemies." The clerk stood up, as did Mud. "By the way, if you're planning on leaving the area of Galtheus, I suggest you do it before the week from now, after the tournament is over, preferably. If you linger too long, you might find yourself trapped here with the rest of your life. Let me know when you plan to do so. I can make it, easier for you." Mud could understand why she would provide free assistance for fighting the wave, but what would motivate her to assist in leaving the town? and why would it become more difficult to leave the city after 1 week? Judging by his previous questions, asking would be useless. Still, there was no less for trying. Why would you help me? It is common sense that the Delvers Association would help its members, and that its members would help the Delvers Association, isn't it? The predatory look in her eyes made Mud doubt that it was that simple. End of chapter. Chapter 82. Muddied Meltdown. After finishing the meeting with the clerk, Mud returned to the lobby. Since there was no plans until the next morning, Mud wanted to ask permission to continue repairing the town. There was a chipped bit of masonry down on the back of the alley that had been bothering the golem for some time. Mud's search was halted, however, by an errant thought across the thought of the mechanical mind during its routine review of recent events. Why did Jibrax not want me to know about the sub-basement? Originally, Mud had ignored that question, chalking it up to the demon's habit of attempting to upset anyone she could. However, there was a flaw in that logic. If she truly did hide the information to annoy Mud, then she would have been happy when the deception was revealed. After all, if Mud simply never found out about the sub-basement, there would be no reason for the golem to get upset. Instead, Jibrax had seemed annoyed and unwilling when the truth was revealed. It was a possibility that she simply wanted Mud to take more time to notice, but that didn't seem right either. Mud was still overly concerned and continued towards the association employee. Still, it continued this line of reasoning. Another explanation is just that Jibrax was withholding a useful resource in order to stunt Mud's growth. That also seemed wrong, as there was no useful-looking resource in the sub-basement, unless Mud missed something. Even then, Jibrax had up until this point not acted to actually reduce Mud's combat abilities. She only seemed to limit help when it would require a large amount of effort on her part to aid him. Revealing the sub-basement would require almost no effort, and would have served a useful way to distract Mud in many previous encounters. No, it is unlikely that she was trying to harm Mud by withholding the information. Finally arriving next to the association civilian employee who was assigning tasks, Mud sent a mental message. I wish to continue working on repairing the city. As the civilian nodded and began to write his notes, Mud continued his train of thought. If Jibrax was not holding the information to harm Mud, and then the only other reason would be to fit her personality as if it would benefit herself. The only thing that Jibrax seemed to desire was her own pleasure, and the death and suffering of sapiens. Within the basement was a highly unstable, extremely dangerous artifact that may or may not require regular maintenance, located in close proximity to a human population center. You'll be working. I will not do the work tonight. Cutting off the now confused-looking employee, Mud quickly dashed out of the association building and back towards home. Through vision granted by the domain, the drive still appeared stable, but that was little comfort to Mud at the moment. Shooting through the woods as the assistance of force bolts, Mud soon arrived at the mansion. Mud rushed down the stairs in the basement, staring at Jibrax. Jibrax, how long until the Tangle drive fails? An annoyed look crossed the demon's face, like a child caught stealing a cookie. Drat! He caught on. We shall have about 4 days before it goes critical. Leaning back in her unseen chair, she continued smugly. My contract only requires me to inform you of imminent threats, so I was hoping that you would be so busy with something else that you would fail to contain it by the time I told you. Oh well. Regrettably, Mud had been required to make many concessions in the contract with Jibrax to avoid even bigger problems. The book on demonology had warned that ordering a demon to do too many things would simply allow the demon to avoid following orders by wasting time following other orders. Unlike Construct's orders, which followed a strict hierarchy where superior orders overrode inferior ones, contract magic treated all orders as equally important. If put in a situation where it was impossible to follow every given order, the contract demon could simply choose which order to follow. Of course, it was possible to specify certain orders to be a higher priority, but that was useful sparingly due to the risk of abuse. For example, if Mud had ordered Jibrax to warn of all potential threats, she could waste time listing off every strong creature on the planet instead of the ones that are actually likely to be threats. Ordering her to list the dangers based on severity would also not work. There were countless extremes unlikely but massive in scale disasters should she choose in that case. If ordered to list threats based on likelihood, it could list extremely minor but possible threats. No solution was perfect. Jibrax would certainly have been required to inform Mud about the risk while there was still time to prevent it. Mud had made sure of that. However, there was a decent probability that some unexpected circumstances would crop up in the meantime, making dealing with the situation impossible. There was no way for Mud to make Jibrax account for events that she had no way of knowing or of predicting. That was what the demon had been banking on. The same completely unpredictable event would make her warning become too late, without her technically violating the contract. Mud would have to be more wary of the sort of deception in the future. How do I prevent the drive from fading? Jibrax sighed and walked to the languid steps towards the center of the runic circle which had imprisoned her, which Mud had first entered in the basement. Restore the ruins to the state they were when you found me. Mud's diligence in preventing the ruin work from dismantling it previously now paid off. Thanks to the golem's precise memory, the array was quickly restored to its original state. With Mud's new understanding of runes, it was now clear that the circle functioned as more merely than a prison. Weaved within the standard barrier scripts was embedded a code which allowed for the short-distance translocation of matter. As the final rune was put in place, a rainbow light flowed outwards through the ruins, quickly filling up the cold stone basement with a soft, multi-hued glow. Mud wondered if the colors of the runes indicated some underlying connection to the divine magic. With the light restored, Jibrax set to work. Already in her demonic form, she used one long claw to slice a long gash along her longer arm. From the wound flowed a purplish red blood, each thick droplet vanishing in a burst of light moments before landing on the ground. The demon allowed her blood to flow freely for a time. After nearly a minute, a glob of blood actually landed on the stone floor, not vanishing like the previous. The droplet was quickly followed by several more, forming a small puddle on the cold floor. Jibrax lifted her arm quickly, healing her arm and turning towards Mud. That should be good for now. It'll last perhaps another month, so long as the cherub is doing his part. He's the reliable type, though, so I doubt that there's any risk of him falling behind in his duties. You can take apart the ruins now. Mud hesitated. Should it actually take apart the ruins? While Jibrax had been useful as an ally and a source of information, she was also extremely dangerous. Having designed the contract that bound them together with its own muddy hands, Mud was keenly aware of the document's many shortfalls. Situations like the Tango Drive were certain to happen again in the future. Mud? Jibrax asked with a bit of worry in her voice at the unmoving construct. After a few more moments of hesitation, Mud moved to dismantle the ruins surrounding Jibrax, met by a sigh of relief from the demon. While it's true that Mud could never truly trust the compressed demon, Mud had to admit that keeping her captive would be no better. In the case of a near disaster with the Tego Drive, its failure, and not actually because of Jibrax, rather she simply had not gone out of her way to prevent it. Having her imprisoned, or even killing her, would not have avoided the problem. I was worried for a moment that you were going to keep me locked up in there. It's a good thing that you don't have a normal emotions or... Lie down and do not talk. Enforced by a contract, Jibrax fell to the floor and clenched her jaw. I read a book on animal training at the Master's Library when I first contracted you. The book advised rewarding wanted behavior and punishing unwanted behavior. Jibrax trembled slightly on the ground with the word punishing, flashbacks of a certain pot of tea running through her head. I provided sufficient quantities of freedom as a reward for being useful, but now I understand that I've been insufficient with my punishment. Jibrax frantically shook her head, as if to indicate that Mud had been plenty thorough with her punishment. Well, it is regrettable to spend valuable time which could be used for other constructive tasks. On your re-education, I believe it's still the most efficient use of time available to me. Your punishment will continue until the hour before dawn. That night, Mud gained 3 more levels in the torture skill. End of chapter. Chapter 83. Martyr's Might. The paint is too thick for one man to clear away alone. Even as you chip at the edges, the artist continues painting. Only by working together can we wipe the mirror clean. Come together, my brothers. With the pure emanations, we can shatter the mirror. But the painter knows his own weakness. He comes up with a clever trick. The painter carefully designs the stage so that it'll appear to be enemies. As your soul warps to the deception, you take on this false role. Your brother fights brother, so enraptured by the blood and sweat and tears of his role that he is lost in the performance. To come together, we must put aside petty differences. What is a nation? Just pretending to own a slice of a lie. We all know who it really belongs to. What is a species? Just a costume that we've been fitted with at birth. Just take it off. When you strip away the carefully crafted falsehoods, we will all be the same. Pure souls trapped in this cage and cut off from the divine. Spread the word now, brothers. There are more of us than you realize. Spread the word. But stay low. The agents of the demiurge are all around us, awaiting your signal. You'll know it when you see it, and when the time is right, we'll come together and split the whole white thing open. Excerpt from Return to the Astral. The day had finally arrived, the long-awaited wave. A group of 4 marched calmly towards the pillboxes arranged in front of the dungeon entrance. The strange silence filled the pre-dawn. Only a slight sea breeze could be heard. The front lines were still, the soldiers withdrawn. No monsters now advanced from the depths. At one defensive structure stood Prince Cain and his group, engaged in some final preparations and adjustings of equipment. A familiar delver led Mud towards the structure which had been assigned to the Golem's group, the demi-sheep priest, Ovis. Mud felt a hint of malice from the priestess, which had not been present the last time they had met. After leading them to the structure and deflecting a pickup line from Cobb, the priestess asked Mud to follow her slightly to the side. Mud felt unsure about following her, given the malice that he was now feeling. Taking advantage of the previous day's conversation, Mud sent a message to Cobb. "Cobb, should I follow her order?" Unfortunately, Cobb seemed thoroughly distracted by the swift rebuff and his advances of a moments ago, and responded only absent-mindedly, "Huh? Yeah, whatever." With no choice, Mud followed the priestess around the side of the defensive structure and out of view. Turning back towards Mud, Ovis held aloft to a small metal statue of Yaldabaoth, smiling slightly. She spoke in her usual carefree tone. "You were really impressive in the tournament, Mud, and I'm proud of you. I just wanted to give you a blessing before the big day." "Why did you lead me away from the party to give me a blessing?" "Oh, I was worried the others would be jealous and wanted too. But my mana is limited, and I didn't want to disappoint them. You know." Ovis steadily advanced and lowered her now slightly glowing figure towards Mud, a steady flow of mana still flooding outwards. "No, this is too dangerous." Mud began constructing a force bolt to launch beside itself. In the moment the spell began to form, Ovis's eyes twitched. She noticed. In the next moment she lunged forward, figure clutched in her hand. "Die!" Mud tried to dodge to the side, but the golem's inexperience with legs caused it to trip. Its repaired weapon was waiting for it inside the pillbox, but Mud hadn't had a chance to take it before being led aside, so blocking was impossible. Morphing its body around the object as large as a figurine was also well beyond the golem's ability. With no weight to avoid it, Mud was struck by the figurine. A blinding whiteness filled the golem's vision. A heavy pressure fell upon its soul. Screams of tormented souls was all that could be heard. It felt altogether similar to the strike by the head priest. This time, however, there was no leader to bear the brunt of the attack. Only the savage grace was that the spell itself was significantly less powerful. HP reduced by 23. The pain of failure filled Mud. So overwhelming was the damage and pain that even as the spell faded from light returned, Mud found itself unable to control its spasming body. Smoke rose from its body, and the surface bubbled as if boiling. "Not dead yet. I'll fix that." Ovis concentrated more power into her figurine, but before she could strike, a blur of metal smashed into her from the side, bending her sharply in half and laying her sprawling in the grass. As Mud finally regained control of its body, the golem finally managed to turn its head to assess the situation. There, on the ground, lay a struggling Ovis, pinned under the heavy body of Prince Cain. Although the priestess struggled, she was unable to move the prince even an inch as he sat on her back, holding her arms tight behind her back. By the time Mud struggled to his feet, the remainder of Prince's group had arrived, followed shortly by a dozen city guards. Seeing the escape was now impossible, Over stopped struggling and was quickly secured by the guard, allowing the prince to stand. Once the guard member, was clearly a higher rank, gave a sharp salute to the prince before speaking. "Prince Kane, would you please explain what happened? I witnessed this priestess assault that golem, who I understand is part of the city's fighting forces. I tackled her, but I don't know the full situation. You'll have to ask the priestess and the golem for that." Turning towards Mud for a moment, a look of disgust crossed the guard's face. Instead, she moved to question Ovis. "Demi-human, why did you attack that thing? You should know that it's under the protection of the association." Ovis smiled, but looked even more fake than usual. "If I could throw away my own life to destroy that abomination, it would be worth it. My only regret is I failed to get it." Turning to her side towards Kane, she spoke directly to the prince. "Kane, you're a member of the venerable Gnostic Church, aren't you? You have the power to overrule the corrupt local government. Strike it down now. No one will be able to oppose you." Kane looked down on Mud. After a long moment he crossed his arms and shook his head. "He has done nothing wrong. I know the Church has an unfavorable view on constructs, but I won't just execute." "It's no execution," Ovis shouted over the prince's words. Her usual serene face finally twisted into one of anger. "It is not alive. It is a mockery of life, an insult to all who were crafted by the Archons." Ovis spit towards Mud, although her arm didn't quite reach the golem. "It is not an execution, but the destruction of a vile machine." Kane simply sighed. Instead of replying, he turned towards the guard. "Do not charge her with treason. I don't take offense to her, strong words. Just charging her for attempted murder against an association member." But the guard's reply was cut off by Kane. "Attempted murder. Mud is recognized as a friendly, intelligent life form by this kingdom and will be treated as such by the law. Am I clear?" Although dissatisfaction was clear in the guard's face, she nodded in affirmation. Seeing that the prince would not help her, Ovis hung her head and was silently led away. With the situation momentarily resolved, Kane muttered something to Magnus which Mud could not make out, earning an annoyed grunt from the great magician. Muttering under his breath, Magnus walked over to Mud. Before the golem could react, the elderly man whipped out his hand with a surprising speed and shot a spell at Mud. A bright flash filled Mud's vision, and the weight fell upon the golem's soul. The cries of tortured souls could be heard, but this time playing in reverse. Damage to Mud's body healed the same way it was damaged, and Mud could feel the temperature lowering. By the time the spell faded, Mud felt good as new. A quick check of the record showed that it was now back to full health. "What a waste of mana. He could have just recovered anyway," Magnus continued mumbling as he followed Kane back to their own pillbox. Turning back towards his own box, Mud pulled a now prepared and upgraded chain weapon made by Ingert into its muddy body, and then put its back cloak on. As he readied for combat, Novus walked over and stood next to him. "Hey, Mud, did something happen with that priestess?" There was a flash of light and a bit of commotion, but I was busy putting on my armor. "It was nothing important," replied Mud, sending a message to Cobb. Mud asked an important question. "Cobb, should I die?" No," Cobb answered with uncertainty. Mud was pleased about that. The golem didn't particularly want to follow that order. End of chapter. Chapter 84. Mayhem at the Mouth. Everything was in place as it should be, with the structure fully cleared just the day before. The wave could be manageable. It was still unclear what lingering effects the removed artifact might have on the stored mana in the dungeon. Leader Ghoul hardened himself for a difficult day. Standing on an elevated wooden platform with the High Priest Decidium on guard, Captain Algar, he examined the arrayed defenses. The only good news was the quality of personnel available. This was, without a doubt, the strongest force that Galtheus had ever brought to bear for a wave. The great magician Magnus alone was incredibly valuable. Anyone who earned the title of Bibliothetica was a power that can rival entire nations. It was entirely unfortunate that Magnus's area of expertise was not particularly suited to large-scale combat. If the hermit Sithla could be convinced to assist in the efforts, the defense would have been trivial. The great enchanter had even said as much, once bragging to the city council how he could devise a mechanism that could fully automate the defenses of the dungeon mouth. He had gone on to say that the city would not afford it, and that it wasn't worth his time besides. Despite his tendency to be a jerk, Sithla had still managed to provide valuable assets for the city's defense. His golem, the sword, and his so-called niece, Lynae already suspected that they were not truly related. Jabrax and Sithla looked nothing alike, and their smell was completely different. Although when Ghoul had visited Sithla recently, the only thing he could smell on old man was the overwhelming stench of preservation salts, as if he had been completely doused in the stuff. Of course, Magnus was not the only useful personnel sent by the king. Prince Cain himself was a skilled frontline warrior. He would be extremely useful for storing beasts long enough to be struck by artillery. His bodyguard, the invisible Sibylla, would be useful in assassinating key targets. The black-armored samurai Shin was simply straightforwardly skilled at combat. No matter how bad things got, Ghoul felt comfortable trusting the front lines to them. Several hundred other Delvers, priests, soldiers, magicians, and mercenaries also filled the city in various strategic locations. Ideally, the vast majority of enemies would be killed as they exited the initial fortification, with only rare stragglers needing to be hunted down by the city at large. To that end, several large emplacement weapons had been constructed on the rooftops, aimed to strike a kill zone in front of the dungeon entrance and in the tunnel itself. Unfortunately, static traps were largely useless. They would only activate once, killing a small number of enemies at best. Even enchanted ones designed to reset themselves would be seen as an enemy by the gestalt of the dungeon and destroyed by the beasts. Still, deep pitfalls and trenches had been dug into the front of the dungeon. They wouldn't last long before filling with corpses, but they would at least buy some time. Quite the turnout, wouldn't you say? This is the best prepared I've ever seen it. Beside him, Algar spoke with a chipper tone. Ghoul had known her long enough to know that she was faking it. Yeah, I have a bad feeling about this too. The massive man fiddled with his thick grey handlebar moustache. Put your faith in the demiurge. This is a trial to make us struggle and grow stronger. It does the Archons no good if we simply die. The god will send no test that cannot be overcome. High Priest Decidium spoke confidently from his side. I appreciate your faith, Father, but what about when humans interfere with Archon's plan and make things harder? The Citium looked off into the sky. I suppose we can only do our best, can't we? Well, at least I know I can count on you to give a good strike. I really felt that one on the tournament, you know. Releasing a booming laugh, Ghoul slapped the High Priest on the back, causing him to stumble slightly forward and nearly off the platform. All the assembled forces stood with a tense focus on the first rays of sun peeking over the high mountains in the east of Golthaeus. The black of night slowly shifted to the orange twilight of morning. Clear skies matched with a cool, salty breeze from the ocean. It would have been a nice day today. A deep rumbling shook the earth, subtle at first, but growing in intensity until the ground visibly shook. Already the echoing insectoid shrieks echoed down through the long halls of the dungeon fortification. At the end of the long straight tunnel of the dungeon entrance, an mass of green could be seen. Despite the many light sources set into the walls of the tunnel, the swarming forms were quickly blanketing in darkness, as their bulk covered and smothered every source of light. It seemed to much less like a horde of individuals, and more like a flowing liquid spraying at high pressure from the dungeon mouth. "Artillery 1, launch!" The magically enhanced voice of Leader Ghoul cut through the clicker on the screeching. The artillery, resembling a large hollow cylinders, pointed towards the dungeon entrance. Mud had unfortunately not had a chance to examine them closely. From a distance, they each appeared to be situated on a swiveling base, which allowed them to be aimed in any direction with considerable effort. Although they had already been locked in place, aiming directly down the dungeon fortification hall, in terms of length, it was as long as thrice the height of an adult human, and the interior was large enough for an adult human to fit inside, with the hands to their sides. A dozen of the devices all activated nearly simultaneously at the leader's order. A large spherical projectile rocketed out of each, the only sound the light whistling as they cut through the air. As each projectile struck an oncoming mass of insects, explosions of various elements covered the horde. From one shell a blast of electricity, from another a burst of fire. Another still seemed to simply crush the insects back with an unseen force. Mud sent Paracosia to Jibrax, who stood nearby, watching the carnage with a bored expression. Jibrax, why do you not simply use the most effective element? Those things may all look the same from the outside and with how they act, but you need to remember that they are each individuals. There may be some who have picked up the resistance to some element or the other. If you only pick up one or two elements, then the one's restraints to that magic will simply slip through. See for yourself. Look through the damage that the spells fade. Mud focused on the areas where the spells had impacted as flames, frost, and steam that blocked vision slowly faded. While the horde of enemies had been momentarily pushed back, already they flowed back forward. Although the area struck with the artillery was almost nothing but corpses now, Jibrax's words proved to be true. Sprinkled sparsely through the area of destruction were insects that showed little or no sign of damage, likely those that coincidentally had the proper resistance to survive the shell which struck the area. Examining the elevated artillery, Mud noticed human sliding metal spheres into the open ends of the cylinders. Judging by the large pile of similar beside each artillery installation, they could likely keep this up for some time. Artillery 2, launch! Whistling, then explosions. Again, the wave of insects were pushed back. Still, they only stalled for a moment before flowing again forward. Mud did some quick mental math. The golem considered the reloading time of the artillery, the number of artillery installations, and how much they inhibited their advancing speed, as they had the amount of fire of each simultaneous launch. Based on the golem's calculations, the enemies would reach the end of the tunnel within the next 10 minutes. Artillery 3, launch! Mud had to adjust his predictions after the third wave. The projectile struck the wave of enemies barely slowed at all. The first two shots had cleared away low-tiered enemies. The front of the wave now consisted of higher-tier and resistant beasts that could tank artillery blasts without dying, acting as a bulwark for the horde. At this rate, they would reach the front in 5 minutes. As the horde reached the halfway mark of the tunnel following several more rounds of artillery fire, Gould gave a new order. Dalbers, attack conservatively, don't waste resources. This was an order that included Mud. Using as much external mana as it could grab a hold of, the golem activated Kill Pest spell, billowing out clouds of yellow mist following down the tunnel and in the direction towards the approaching insects. Force bolts would be a waste of focus, being a single target attack. At the same time, countless projectiles and spells flew down the tunnels towards the approaching insects. Burrows, balls, and elemental magic splashed of light, phantasmal bat swarms, and countless other offensive abilities flew down the hall. Again, the horde slowed slightly, but it did not stop. This war of attrition continued for nearly half an hour as the insects pushed indomitably through the hail of attacks. At one point, Worm of the tower pushed rapidly forward, nearly reaching the exit before Ghoul himself dashed forward and killed the beast with us crawling into its mouth and destroying it from the inside. All the while, Mud gained a constant tickle of small amounts of experience. The contribution for the stronger enemies like the Tier 5 worms or the tower was so small that Mud only gained a 1 or even 0 experience. But the gains of the other Tier 2 corpse worms and the Tier 3 glutton worms had been a consistent source of income. That being the case, Mud gained 4 levels during the first half an hour of the wave. This time, Mud decided to focus on leveling its class, reaching level 8 in Master Butler. Mud felt his physical and mental abilities increasing drastically. Before Mud could reach the next level, the tempo of the battle changed. The wave had finally reached the open entrance of the fortification. "Hold the line!" Ghoul himself stood in the front and swirling mass of enemies, alongside the Dalbers most skilled in physical combat. Shin, Kane, and Bear Ursula, and many other physical powerhouses held the wave in place as mages and priests continued to provide support. The artillery now focused only on the upper half of the tall hall, making sure that now to strike their own side of the worries. Safe within the defensive structure, Cobb sat casually while eating a piece of chocolate. Beside him, Nancy Novus shifted her weight from side to side while looking at sharp focus towards the ongoing Millie. "You want to be out in the front lines, don't you?" Cobb asked the girl between bites of candy. "Yeah, they're so cool," Novus replied with a light tone. "Idiot. Screw you." Novus spit back but didn't turn her eyes from the fight. "Novus, your task as protecting my position is also vital. I am tactically significant." "Yes, sir, I understand that, sir." Novus nodded at Mud's reminder, "but standing back as a guard just isn't as romantic. Nobody tells stories about a bodyguard." Mud once again considered eliminating this annoying human. Her preferences were so illogical. Why would you do something dangerous just so that other people would spread intelligence about you more easily? Refocusing on the task at hand, Mud corrupted more free mana with the ideal of home. There was plenty of the stuff around for Mud to use. Hidden below the golem's muddy exterior pulsed an inscribed dodecahedron. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please consider supporting the author from the link down below. Otherwise, if you wish to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so, like liking, subscribing, and possibly even becoming a patron. Otherwise, the easiest way would be to share. And until the next video, I hope that you all have a good one, and I'll see you then. Cheers.